welcome to Tales of Honor Podcast, a podcast dedicated to telling the true stories of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Hello and welcome to Tales of Honor Podcast. I'm your host, Christoph Ambrosch, and what I do with my time is twice a week I get on here and I tell you about the true stories of the Congressional Medal of Honor and its recipients. And tonight's episode is episode 23. It's going to take us back to World War II. And I know some of you might be thinking, Christoph, there's more than just World War II, you know. And I am aware. However, there's a lot from World War II to cover. It was a very, very largely manned war, so there was a lot of people to get through. And trust me, we're going to get to the other stuff. We have a long time to get there, to get through all of them. But before we get into tonight's episode, I want to let you know that is being brought to you today by Sunrise Linens. They're my good friends, and they're a vintage vibe clothing business that offers quality, handmade clothing right here in the good old US of A. Look, if you go over to their store, it's etsy.com/shop/Sunrise Linens. And while you're over there, you can look around. Many good options to choose from. And and there's also going to be a new line coming out for the fall, so keep an eye on that. And when you go to checkout, be sure you enter the promo code TOH25, and that's going to get you 25% off your order. And I mentioned that fall clothing line. Be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram because, well, that's when you'll know when something new hits the market. Sunrise Linens, for nostalgia and wandering. And now, a tale of honor. Rudolph B Davila was born on the 27th of April, 1916, in El Paso, Texas, and would move and be raised in Watts, California. He would later enlist in the Army in March of 1941. In 1944, Rudolph was a staff sergeant assigned to Company H of the 7th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, and on the 28th of May, was involved in a battle that would earn him the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation reads, Staff Sergeant Rudolph B Davila distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism in action on 28 May 1944 near Artina, Italy, during the offensive which broke through the German mountain strongholds surrounding the Anzio beachhead. Staff Sergeant Davila risked death to provide heavy weapons support for a beleaguered rifle company. Caught on an exposed hillside by heavy, grazing fire from a well-entrenched German force, his machine gunners were reluctant to risk putting their guns into action. Crawling 50 yards to the nearest machine gun, Staff Sergeant Davila set it up alone and opened fire on the enemy. In order to observe the effect of his fire, Sergeant Davila fired from the kneeling position, ignoring the enemy fire that struck the tripod and passed between his legs. Ordering a gunner to take over, he crawled forward to a vantage point and directed the firefight with hand and arm signals until both hostile machine guns were silenced. Bringing his 3 remaining machine guns into action, he drove the enemy to a reserve position 200 yards to the rear. When he received a painful wound in the leg, he dashed to a burned tank and, despite the crash of bullets on the hull, engaged a second enemy force from the tank's turret. Dismounting, he advanced 130 yards in short rushes, crawled 20 yards, and charged into an enemy-held house to eliminate the defending force of 5 with a hand grenade and rifle fire. Climbing to the attic, he straddled a large shell hole in the wall and opened fire on the enemy. Although the walls of the house were crumbling, he continued to fire until he had destroyed 2 more machine guns. His intrepid actions brought desperately needed heavy weapons support to a hard-pressed rifle company and silenced 4 machine gunners, which forced the enemy to abandon their prepared positions. Staff Sergeant Davila's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit on him, his unit, and the United States Army. Now, in case you are thinking to yourself that the name of this podcast isn't Tales of Distinguished Service, I need you to just hang in there because there is more to this story. Rudolph was sent back to the U.S. and had his wounds treated at a hospital in Modesto, California. It was in this hospital that he met a nurse named Harriet, and 3 months later, they were married. He went on to earn a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Southern California, and then became a high school history teacher in Los Angeles. Rudolph would retire from teaching in 1977, and once Harriet learned of her husband's heroic actions in Italy, she would petition the government for years by making phone calls and writing letters, as well as doing her own research of military records. She never received a reply until 1996, when a senator from Hawaii mandated that records of Asian Americans that received the Distinguished Service Cross be reviewed. Since Rudolph was the son of a Spanish father and a Filipino mother, his file was one that was reviewed, and on the 21st of June, 2001, President Clinton presented the Medal of Honor to Rudolph and 21 other World War II servicemen of Asian descent. Sadly, only 7 of the 22 recipients were still alive, and Rudolph's persistent wife, Harriet, had died 6 months prior. 3 years and 1 day after losing his wife, Rudolph B Davila lost his life to cancer on the 26th of January 2002. He was buried with full honors in Arlington National Cemetery, Section 67, Grave 3457. And that was A Tale of Honor. Thank you so much for listening to Tales of Honor podcast, and if you like this podcast, which, come on, how could you not like this podcast? Be sure to leave a nice review, a good rating, and tell a friend. If you don't like this podcast, why don't you keep that to yourself? You can see more information on Facebook, Instagram, and at thebeardeddetailer.com/TOH podcast. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to talesofhonorpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Christoph Ambrosch. Thanks for listening.